Me phone rang at 11:47 at night. It wasn't a family member. It was a stranger. His voice cracking against the sound of heavy rain. He told me he had found 2 children shivering under the awning of a deserted warehouse in the industrial district. My niece and nephew. I checked my notifications. My sister, Harper, had sent a screenshot of a rideshare confirmation hours ago, followed by a flight update for Aspen. She hadn't just dumped her kids on me, she had used voice to text, selected the wrong address, and then disabled her notifications to enjoy her flight. She abandoned them in a freezing downpour 15 miles away. Before we dive into this nightmare, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't scream. I grabbed my keys. The drive to the precinct was a blur of slick black asphalt and the rhythmic thumping of windshield wipers. My hands were steady, but my mind was dismantling the last 30 years of my life. For years, I told myself I was the good sister, the reliable one, the fixer. When Harper needed bail money because she assaulted a paparazzi, I paid it. When my mother, Christina, needed someone to co-sign a loan because Harper had maxed out her credit cards, I signed. I thought I was being kind, but as I merged onto the highway, watching the city lights blur, I finally understood the mechanics of my own behavior. It wasn't kindness. It was the fawn response. I learned about it in therapy but never applied it to my own bloodline until now. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. When you grow up in a house where love is conditional and volatility is the weather forecast, you learn that safety doesn't come from fighting back. It comes from compliance. You merge your needs with the aggressor's demands until you don't even know where you end and they begin. I hadn't been saying yes to Harper for decades because I loved her. I said yes because, in my childhood brain, saying no meant danger. It meant my mother's cold silence. It meant Harper's explosive rage. Compliance was my survival strategy. But tonight, that strategy had almost killed 2 children. I pulled into the precinct. Inside, it smelled like stale coffee and damp wool. A female officer led me to a small holding room. Elsie was 9, and Amir was 6. They were sitting on a metal bench, wrapped in rough gray police blankets, their hair plastered to their skulls. When Elsie saw me, she didn't cry. She just let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for hours. She was clutching Amir's hands so hard her knuckles were white. They were soaking wet. I knelt in front of them. I didn't ask where their mother was. I knew where she was. She was in first class, sipping champagne. I pulled them both into my arms. They felt like ice. At that moment, the fawn response died. It was murdered by the cold reality of 2 shivering children treated like luggage. I wasn't going to fix this. I was going to end it. I got the kids back to my condo in downtown Seattle around 1 in the morning. I made them hot chocolate and put them to bed on my sofa. Once they were asleep, I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady now. The shaking had been replaced by a cold, vibrating clarity. I picked up my phone. Harper answered on the 3rd ring. I could hear clinking glasses and laughter in the background. She sounded annoyed. She asked why I was calling so late and if I had forgotten she was on a digital detox. I told her exactly where I had found her children. I told her about the industrial district, the rain, and the police report. I kept my voice flat, stripped of any emotion she could feed on. She sighed. The sound of someone inconvenienced by a waiter. She said the driver must have been an idiot. She told me to file a complaint and get a refund because that ride had cost her $80. I waited for the question, "Are they okay?" It never came. Instead, she told me to keep them until Monday. She said she had paid $15,000 for this retreat, and it was non-refundable. She said she needed this reset for her brand. And if I made her come home early, I would be liable for the wasted money. She told me to stop being dramatic and let her enjoy her peace. In the past, I would have apologized. I would have figured out how to take days off work. But the fawn was dead. I simply said, "Understood," and ended the call. Then I scrolled down my contacts list to a name I hadn't dialed in 2 years. Miles. Harper had spent years painting Miles as the villain. The absent venture capitalist father, who cared more about his portfolio than his progeny. But in my new clarity, I realized I had only ever heard Harper's version. I pressed call. He answered immediately. I told him everything. The ride share. The warehouse. The police. Harper's refusal to return. He went silent for 10 seconds. Then he asked if the children were safe. I told him they were asleep. He said he would be there in 20 minutes. He made it in 15. When I opened the door, Miles didn't look like a villain. He looked like a man preparing for war. He was wearing a tracksuit. But behind him stood a woman in a tailored suit, holding a briefcase. His personal counsel. He walked past me to check on the sleeping children. He stared at them for a long time, a muscle feathering in his cheek. Then he sat at my kitchen table. He told me he had been waiting for this. He knew Harper was negligent, but he could never prove it enough to override the court's bias. He told me he had a war chest of $250,000 sitting in a dedicated account, untouched, waiting for the moment she slipped up. He looked at the police report on the counter. He said she hadn't just slipped up. She had handed him the smoking gun. The lawyer began outlining the strategy. This wasn't a family dispute. This was an emergency custody filing based on imminent danger and abandonment. Miles asked if I was willing to testify against my own sister. I looked at the living room where 2 children had almost frozen to death. I looked at Miles, who had prepared $250,000 just to keep them safe. I told him to tell me where to sign. My phone vibrated. It was my mother, Christina. In the past, seeing her name would have triggered panic. I would have rehearsed apologies. But standing there with Miles and his lawyer, I didn't feel anxiety. I felt like a detective watching a suspect walk into an interrogation room. I looked at the lawyer. She nodded and started recording. I put it on speaker. My mother didn't say hello. She screamed. She asked me what the hell I thought I was doing involving the police. I told her that her daughter had abandoned 2 minors in an industrial park, and that is a crime. She laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound. She told me to stop being dramatic. She said Harper was under stress and needed this break. Then she dropped the bomb. She said I had no right to ruin a trip that she had paid $15,000 for. The room went dead silent. I asked her to repeat that. She didn't hesitate. She was proud of it. She said yes. She paid for the digital detox because Harper is a brand. She said she told Harper explicitly to just put the kids in a car and send them to me. She said she told Harper that even if I said no, I would fold, because I always fold. She said I was the safety net, and it was my job to catch them. I felt a phantom pain, the ghost of the child who just wanted her mother to protect her, but I locked it away. This wasn't a conversation. This was a deposition. I asked her if she knew Harper hadn't verified the address. She said it didn't matter. She said I should have been tracking Harper's location. She accused me of trying to sabotage Harper's career because I was a bitter, childless workaholic. She demanded I call the precinct and tell them it was a miscommunication. She threatened to cut me off from the family permanently if Harper lost any brand deals. I didn't argue. I didn't try to make her see reason. I knew she didn't care. To her, Elsie and Amir weren't children, they were props. I simply said, I have to go now. Mother. She was still screaming when I ended the call. The lawyer stopped the recording. She looked at me with professional admiration. She said she had never heard a grandmother admit to conspiracy to commit child neglect on tape. Christina had just implicated herself as an accessory. Miles stood up and poured a glass of water. His hand shook slightly. He said he used to blame himself for the dysfunction, but now he saw the architecture of it. It wasn't just Harper. It was a production line. And Christina was the foreman. He asked if I was okay. I looked at the silent phone. I felt lighter. The tether was cut. The hope that they would change was gone. And with it, their power over me. Harper arrived back in Seattle 24 hours later. She came straight to my condo. When I opened the door, she didn't look like a worried mother. She looked like a celebrity inconvenienced by a delay. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a cashmere wrap. She stormed past me, scanning the room for her own reflection in the mirror. Where are they? She demanded, pulling off her sunglasses. Her eyes were rimmed with red. But her makeup was perfect. They're with Miles. I said. I didn't close the door. She spun around. Sneering. She asked how I could let him take them. She accused me of betraying her, of stealing her children because I was jealous of her life. I watched her. For the first time, I didn't see the powerful sister I feared. I saw a fragile construct held together by validation. This wasn't just selfishness. It was a narcissistic injury. I had read about it, but seeing it was visceral. A narcissistic injury happens when a narcissist's self-image is threatened. They don't feel guilt. They feel rage that their mask has slipped. Harper wasn't angry because she was worried about the kids' safety. She was enraged because her image as the perfect mother had been shattered. The children were just extensions of her ego. Their trauma was irrelevant because it didn't happen to her. The only thing that mattered was the damage to her brand. You ruined everything. She hissed. Do you know I lost 2 sponsorship deals? People are commenting asking where my kids are. You humiliated me. You abandoned your children in an industrial park. I said quietly. You humiliated yourself. She laughed. A harsh sound. She called me pathetic. She said I was just a boring, invisible worker bee who existed to serve her. I'm done serving you. Harper. I said. She narrowed her eyes. She told me I would regret this. She said she would tell the world I was unstable, that I had kidnapped her kids. Go ahead. I said. Tell them. I have the police report. I have the logs. I have Mom on tape admitting she paid for your trip so you could neglect your kids. Tell your story. Harper. I'll tell the truth. For a second, I saw it. The crack in the facade. The flash of genuine fear. She realized she couldn't bully her way out of this. The narrative wasn't hers anymore. She put her sunglasses back on, wrapped her cashmere tighter, and walked out. I locked the deadbolt. It sounded like a gavel coming down. The emergency custody hearing took place 72 hours later. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. Harper sat at the table in a modest beige suit, looking fragile. Beside her, Christina glared at the back of Miles's head. Harper's lawyer started with a fiction. He painted me as a jealous spinster, weaponizing a misunderstanding to steal the family I couldn't build. He described Miles as an absentee wallet. He claimed Harper was a devoted mother who made one technological error. I didn't flinch. I sat next to Miles's counsel, watching with the detachment of an auditor. They traded in emotion. We traded in data. When I took the stand, I looked directly at the judge. Miles's lawyer asked me to explain why I believed the children were in danger. I opened my folder. Exhibit A. I said steadily. The rideshare data logs provided by the company's safety team. I held up the document. Timestamp, 8:00 p.m. Destination input, voice to text. Address 1000 West Pine Industrial Way. Distance from my home, 15 miles. Notification status manually disabled by user at 8:16 p.m. I let that hang. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had turned off the ability to know if she had made one. Exhibit B. I continued. The National Weather Service report. Temperature 38 degrees. Precipitation heavy rain. The children were outside without coats for 3 hours. Harper's lawyer tried to object. The judge silenced him with a hand. And finally, I said, Exhibit C. I placed a USB drive on the stand. A recording of a phone call from the children's grandmother, Christina, at 1:45 a.m. that night. Christina gasped. Harper's head snapped toward her mother. The audio played. Crystal clear. I paid $15,000 for that retreat. I told her explicitly to just put the kids in a car. You were the safety net. It was your job to catch them. The silence was suffocating. It was the sound of a facade collapsing. The judge stared at the speaker, then at Christina. You paid for your daughter to abandon her children. Christina sputtered. I paid for a vacation I didn't know. Sit down. The judge barked. The ruling was swift. An eviction notice for their entitlement. This court finds severe danger to the children. The judge stated, full physical and legal custody is awarded to the father, Miles. The mother is granted supervised visitation only, pending psychological evaluation. Then she turned to Christina, and regarding the grandmother, based on the admission of conspiracy to commit neglect, I am issuing a temporary restraining order, preventing any unsupervised contact. You are not a safety net. Ma'am, you are a hazard. Harper sobbed. An ugly, guttural sound. Christina sat frozen. Miles looked at me and nodded. We walked out. We didn't look back. The books were balanced. 6 months later, the silence in my condo was peaceful. It smelled like roasted coffee and rain. I was packing a weekend bag for a barbecue. I folded a sketchbook for Elsie and dinosaur figurines for Amir. I tucked a bottle of wine for Miles and his new partner. My movements were slow. I wasn't rushing to fix a disaster. I was getting ready to see my family. My phone sat on the counter. Harper and Christina were blocked everywhere. I heard Harper was trying to rebrand as a victim of the system. I heard Christina was telling people I had suffered a mental break. Let them talk. Their narratives were their prisons. I was free. I drove to Miles's new house in a quiet suburb. It had a security system and parents who paid attention. When I pulled up, Elsie and Amir were running across the lawn. They looked taller, heavier, healthier. Elsie hooked me, burying her face in my coat. She didn't cling like she was drowning anymore. She hugged like she was happy. Amir showed me a scraped knee, wearing the bandage like a badge of honor. Miles was at the grill, flipping burgers. He grinned at me. The tension was gone, replaced by the fatigue of a dad doing his best. We ate on the patio. We laughed. We didn't talk about the warehouse or the court. We just existed in the safety we had built. As I watched the sun dip below the trees, I thought about the guilt I was supposed to feel. Society tells us blood is a binding contract. We are taught family is an unconditional obligation, a debt that can never be paid off. We are told cutting ties is a failure. But sitting there, watching Elsie chase fireflies, I realized the truth. This is the blood myth. We cling to shared DNA like a life raft. Even when it's the anchor dragging us down, we tell ourselves, but she's my mother, as if titles are excuses for cruelty. But biology is just a biological accident, not a moral imperative. Real family isn't defined by whose blood you carry. It's defined by who would bleed for you. Harper shared my DNA, but she would have let those children freeze to protect her vanity. Christina gave me life, but she would have sacrificed my sanity to maintain control. They were relatives, not family. Miles wasn't my blood, yet he stood beside me in the trenches. He used his resources to protect the vulnerable, the lawyer, the judge, the stranger at the warehouse. They were more family to those kids in one night than Harper had been in a lifetime. Family is safety. Family is the people who respect your boundaries and prioritize your well-being. If the people who share your last name can't meet that standard, you have every right to revoke their title. I didn't lose a family. I survived one. And in the clearing I made, I planted a new one. One rooted in respect. One that would never leave a child in the rain. If you've ever had to choose your peace over your bloodline, share peace in the comments. And if this story helped you feel seen, please share it. You never know who needs permission to walk away today.